was. So it would have been very, very impressive. And again, another great example of the Assyrian mastery of perspective during this time, finally by Nineveh. The reliefs in this central room in 36 depict the siege of a city in Judah, the city of Lachish. And we're going to talk about Lachish in a bit of depth right now. Just going to jump over here and take a look at some of these reliefs. Again, all four walls of this room were completely covered in relief relating to the siege of this city. And this is actually interesting. It's one of the few times that we have, again, multiple sources for a major event. The siege of Lachish is recorded in Assyrian reliefs. It's recorded by Herodotus. It's in the Bible. And of course, we have the site of Lachish itself, which has been excavated. And some of the things mentioned, for example, the siege ramps that you can see here that are built up against the wall of the city. Those have actually been excavated and discovered at Lachish. And we see this battle mentioned in Kings 13, Chronicles 32, and Isaiah 36. Sennacherib attempted to bring King Hezekiah of Judah, whose capital was at Jerusalem, under his control. He launched a major campaign towards Jerusalem, but was unable to take it. And we have a few different accounts of why this was the case. Herodotus ends up saying that there was a famine and plague. Mice ended up eating the bowstrings of the Assyrian troops. Everyone was so hungry. Again, we can't really trust what Herodotus says because Herodotus makes up a lot of stuff. If you trust Herodotus, you believe that the pyramids were built by the daughters of the Pharaoh sleeping with one man per stone. So it's a little bit out there. But that said, I mean, maybe there is some reasoning behind this. That again, the siege of a city like Jerusalem would have required, quite a bit. The Bible records, of course, that it was the God Yahweh coming to the aid of the Israelites and repelling Sennacherib. So the angel of the God Yahweh comes and defeats Sennacherib, killing about 185,000 of his troops, driving him away. And the Assyrians also record that they did not take Jerusalem. What they did take was Lachish. And of course, they're not going to admit defeat. They're not going to say, well, we tried to take Jerusalem, but hey, we weren't really strong enough to do it. No, of course, they portray what was probably a defeat or a stalemate in terms of a very, very positive way. They say that the defeat of Lachish was so successful that King Hezekiah was trapped like a bird in a cage. And what they were able to do was bring him under their control without the use of force, without losing any more men, and that huge amounts of tribute were sent from that point on. In fact, it's probable that in the planning of this palace, that this room was reserved for Jerusalem. Some scholars believe that this, again, consider the central location of this, the crown jewel, if you will, was probably reserved again for depictions of Jerusalem. Again, that failed, and so it again became Lachish, a city again to the north. And these depictions again are very true to the archaeological record. For one thing, right, we see the city walls of Lachish in the background, and this tower which is jutting out in the front. Lachish itself actually did have this sort of towered entryway, portico, if you will, that stretched out from its main city wall. Again, it had two walls, a main wall and a curtain wall. And so you see a reconstruction here based on the archaeological evidence, and then also, right, the depiction in the Assyrian reliefs at Nineveh. Again, Assyrian siege techniques, we've seen this before, right? The use of siege ramps to attack a city, the use of siege engines. Again, here's another one of our siege engines with its wheels and its battering ram trying to knock down the upper mud brick superstructure, and our Israelite or Judahite defenders throwing rocks, bricks, and burning brands. These are ancient Molotov cocktails, if you will, trying to light the siege engine on fire and stop the Assyrian attack. So again, attack, counterattack, defenses. We see this in the reliefs. We see it in the archaeological record too. At the excavations at Lachish, the Assyrian siege ramp is still there. It's very clear. You can see the city walls, and there's this massive, earth construction leading up to it. The Babylonians later attacked and used the same tactics. But you can see on the back where the defenders ended up building the wall higher and higher and higher. So it was this attack and counterattack with the wall being built higher, the Assyrians trying to come higher, 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 higher. Finally, right, the city is actually taken. So, so these central reliefs, again, surrounding all four corners, or all four sides of the room, stepping into this, right? It's almost like, a form of virtual reality, or stepping into this world that has been carefully constructed with messages that are very clearly depicted for Sennacherib's purposes. What we see as well is the conflation of time in some of these images. You can see here, right, we've got an attack taking place, right? And in fact, other sections of this room in 36 show the preparations for the attack. This main attack scene is the central sort of motif. You would see this right as you entered in. It was square on the back of the wall. And you can see the composition here, everything leading up to the attack of the city right here. But at the same time, time is conflated. In other reliefs we see, right, with the lamassu, the before, the during, and the after of the construction and movement of these lamassu. In the siege reliefs we see a little bit more of a conflation of time. While this attack is taking place, you can see sort of the aftermath of the attack as well. You can see people leaving the city, right? These are deportees leaving the city with only the clothes on their back, literally being carted away. We can see the unfortunate sort of aftermath again of those that resisted being impaled on spikes by the Assyrian attackers. And so this is sort of a during and after, which are in the same composition, right next to each other. And this continues in some of the other panels as well, right, with the capture of the population and the deportation of these individuals from the city, again, being dealt with quite harshly. In this case, people are being flayed alive. I'm going to jump through. There's another depiction. And again, look at the detail of the different types of trees. I forget the number. Oh, and actually, these are vines, if you take a look closely, right, with grape clusters. And they look like grapevines, too. I forget how many trees exactly there are. There's a study that's been done on this, and I'll see if I can round it up, because it's really interesting. Sennacherib, as an Assyrian king, of course, goes on campaign, but seeing as what happened to his father, he's not as active. We don't see him actually participating in the battle itself. He more stays off to the side. He did go, but you can see him sitting here on his throne and his sort of war tent, which is very much off to the side of the main battle. And what we see is actually an inscription, again, right above him here, another one behind him, which tells us exactly what's going on. And it says, Sennacherib, supreme king, king of Assyria, sat on his throne while the booty of Lachish was passed before him. So again, he's just sort of, again, reviewing the spoils of war, as it were. You can see here as well that in these reliefs, the face of the king has been hacked out. And Sennacherib, for a number of reasons, least of which we'll get to in just a moment, was not a very popular king. He was not popular at home. He was not popular abroad, certainly not for doing things like sacking Lachish. When Nineveh finally fell in 612 BCE, it was burned to the ground. The Southwest Palace was burned to the ground, and the attackers most likely took the opportunity to deface the image of the king, as you can see here. So that's most likely what happened. In fact, Sennacherib claims that he deported over 200,000 people during this campaign alone. So you can see how that would make him pretty unpopular. But this is how he chose to deal with these rebellions in the Levant. And to the south, he had a similar problem with a confederation of Aramaeans, Chaldeans, and of course Elamites. Elamites are always going to be a problem. They actually end up taking over Babylon. Just take a look at this. Say here, whoops, was that the last one? That was the last one. Let me just jump back here real quick. And what we see is a Chaldean by the name of Mushizib Marduk of Babylon. He takes control of the city. And up to this point, Sennacherib has had to travel down to Babylon to put down unrest. He's set up rulers, puppet kings on the throne of small cities. But Babylon, of course, right, is, again, this sort of ancient religious, it's not the religious heart of the Assyrian Empire, right? That's Ashur. But it also, occupies this place of respect in the pantheon. Again, remember, our Assyrian kings have gone there, participated in the ceremonies, at times even led the ceremonies in Babylon. In 689, this changes drastically. We see this king, Mushizib Marduk of Babylon, not just take over the city, but he ends up opening up the coffers of Babylon, the city coffers, the temple coffers, and he goes to the Elamites and says, give me an army. They come in force and really pose a tremendous threat to the Assyrians. Sennacherib ends up responding, sending an army to the south, but suffers heavy, heavy casualties, responding to this great threat. And because of this, because of the series of events, he makes a choice. Instead of setting up another puppet king and having to deal with this over and over and over again, in 689, Sennacherib decides that Babylon presents too much of a threat to his power and ends up sacking the city entirely. He destroys Babylon, he sacks the palace, burns it to the ground, and worst of all, actually ends up carrying off the gods and bringing them back to Ashur and to Nineveh. And this, of course, is very, very bad. This does not bode well for what will happen later. So after this 9 months of siege, he ends up destroying Babylon entirely. And only 9 years later, and this is, of course, an incredibly unpopular act. This was a choice, just a very bad move on Sennacherib's part. 9 years later, his court is in open rebellion. His sons end up killing him, and in 681, he dies. And this is sort of, said in the Bible by these biblical prophets as revenge for his attack on Jerusalem. The Babylonians are angry with him, and again, this unpopular king who, had a troubled childhood, right? Losing his father at a young age. You can see this come full circle by the end of his reign. So in 681, Sennacherib dies, and we'll pick up with the events that follow the sacking of Babylon and see what happens next week.